Welcome everyone around the world for joining us for Ask the Howlers episode 27, Manipulating Reality. And yes, as always, we are live. You'll probably see a scenery change from myself, but we won't talk about that today. We're going to talk about what we're all here for. Of course, it's always a pleasure to join you and to host you all. For those who don't know me or they may be a little bit new to Ask the Howlers, you may be seeing this on the LinkedIn streams or VMware's LinkedIn. My name is James Aliband. I'm a senior security strategist and manager of product marketing at VMware. Now, before we dive into today's session, just remember this is a cybersecurity expert roundtable where trusted advisors and security strategists discuss the latest threats and security challenges. And what we're here to do is provide actionable tips and resources. And of course, most importantly, while you're all here, answer your questions. Now, last time out, I was joined by somebody who's also joining me today. Of course, I was joined by Tom Kellermann, where we spoke, about the global insurgency, the cyber escalation. What we did is we really dug into the past 12 months and we've seen that significant rise in ransomware, supply chain attacks and organizations who've continued to come under threat. And no doubt we'll touch on some of the topics further today as well. Now, just before I do bring my guests in, as I mentioned earlier about answering your questions, I want to remind you that we have the Q&A running, where we're going to be asking questions at the end. There may be some questions that come up during the session, and I'll pivot towards them, of course, as well. And also, as I always ask you, it's great to see our global audience. I know, talking on behalf of Tom and talking on behalf of Rick and all of the Howlers, including myself as well, we're so proud to reach a global audience and know that people are tuning in from around the world. So as you're typing your questions, make sure you tell us where you're from, which state you're in, what country you're in, and where you're tuning in from. Now, let's introduce my guests today. First off, we have Tom Kellermann, who is our head of cybersecurity strategy at VMware and a member of the Secret Service Cybercrime Board. I'm getting better at that, Tom. Secondly, we have Rick McElroy, who is our principal cybersecurity strategist. Guys, familiar faces, but thank you for joining me again today. Awesome. Right. Before I'm going to jump in, there's two things I want to start with. Firstly, of course, you know it, my icebreaker. So I want to know, and Rick, we're going to start with you today. I want to know if you could do anything right now to make a big impact. And by the way, to the audience, I have not told them what this icebreaker is. So this is completely unscripted. But I want to know if you could do anything right now to make a big impact, what would you do and why? Rick, over to you.
Oh, I'd snap my fingers like thanks, and instantly everything would be patched and updated to current standards. Because wouldn't that be cool to have a good foundation to build off of? So I'm going to go with that.
I love it. TK.
Well, if I was the director for national cybersecurity for the U.S. government, I would bring the pain against the very organized cybercrime cartels of Eastern Europe and allow the Cyber Command to launch offensive operations that are proportionate to what we've seen, but such that they would degrade and disrupt their activities for months to come.
Love that. Love that. Well, I'm going to go from a different angle, but I would ensure that there's more opportunities for more people around the world to get into security, to help our security operations members, IR partners, and give the much needed resource and expertise that I think we all need to continue to advance and build out security operations to be able to deal with the insurgency that of course we've seen as well. But that's great, and I love the security focus there as well. TK, just obviously we spent the last session getting to know you as well, and we spoke for about 3 or 4 minutes, getting to know you as a person. So obviously we've got some of the listeners from last session as well. So I'm going to pass the baton to Rick on this one. And Rick, just for the listeners, while we're here, can you just spend a couple of minutes? Of course, you're a big voice of VMware security, the Howlers, of course, as well. But where did it all start for you, and why did you get into cybersecurity?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess I'll start with my official career and getting paid to do security. I got out of the Marine Corps and I got some really good advice. I didn't know what to do career wise. There's not much that a heavy machine gunner can do. Like they just don't let you, do that job in the civilian world, right? And so I went to school and really started digging into operating systems, how they worked, networks, how this thing called the internet works. And I got lucky. I got hired by a firm in Southern California that had organized a lot of the hacking community in Southern California. And I just did anything I could for the team. Like I just volunteered to do documentation, or I have kind of a pretty face. And as we know, especially in the mid 90s, if you had a mohawk, companies really didn't want to talk to you, right? And I'm glad to see that's all changed and it's different, and we embrace that uniqueness now. But it gave me a pretty good face to go in and talk to the customers while the team was doing some red team activities, and then of course figured out how to do that, and then went to do it for the U.S. government against the military. So yeah.
Oh, awesome, and thank you for diving in. I'm going to say that you've got the pretty face. We'll give you that one. We definitely will. Guys, let's jump into our topic today: manipulating reality. Now, of course, we've recently launched our global incident response report. So, first area I really wanted to dig into, and as I was reading through the report, and of course, Tom, you sent it over to me. The one thing that kind of jumped out to me straight away was the findings that targeted victims now experience integrity and destructive attacks more than 50% of the time. TK, would you like to comment on what you think some of the emerging techniques cyber criminals are using to achieve this?
I think we just need to revisit the manifestation, the initial manifestation of ransomware. Whether it was WannaCry or NotPetya, it was originally used in a destructive fashion to cripple systems. And now that you see the evolution of modern ransomware that has built-in evasion techniques, more often than not, adversaries are willing to leverage a ransomware attack as a secondary stage against you to punish the defender, or leverage modern wiper technology against you to punish you. But it becomes more nefarious than that when you think about how they're targeting backup systems. And they're leveraging the attack from the backup system themselves because they've already been granted access to that infrastructure by some access broker, who there's a myriad of which in Eastern Europe again. I do think destructive attacks and integrity attacks show an escalation and really show that the adversary is willing to burn down the environment to punish you as a defender for reacting to them, which challenges all of us to really revisit how we make incident response and to do so in a much more clandestine fashion.
Rick, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, look, it should just be expected behavior that the attackers, when inside of an environment, are going to do things like log manipulation. Time manipulation becomes very interesting from an attacker perspective, right? There's not only could you create gaps in logging, right, where a threat hunter is looking during a certain time period, that activity doesn't exist because I've manipulated the timestamps inside of an environment. DDoSes, of course, can be enabled through that. And then things like cert revocation and doing application control type activities, whether that's at the network or on the endpoint, whatever the case may be, it puts all of that in question because, of course, now there's issues with the time on the endpoint versus the NTP server versus the server doing the actual revocation. And TK actually just sent this along to our group yesterday. But one of the sister companies out there that's doing research, highlighted this new Chaos ransomware kit, right? Which is super interesting because it has a lot of things in common with ransomware kits, but then it doesn't. Like when you look at the payload execution, it essentially rewrites all the bits of the files and then base encodes those, which becomes like, I'm not getting my data back. There's no chance that they're actually hitting me for ransom. And so I do want to highlight that what we're seeing is toolkits built and customized to do more destructive activities. And I think that's deeply concerning.
No, I couldn't agree more. And Rick, one of the areas that I know that's close to your heart, and of course, I maybe teed you up a little bit on this perspective, but another one of the statistics that really jumped out was 51% of respondents who experienced extreme stress or burnout during the past 12 months, and then 65% said they're considering leaving their job because of it. And especially when we consider that security operations is typically a well-paid career as well, but still leading towards, leaving their job because of it. What's your thoughts, and can you dig into this a little bit further?
Yeah, look, anecdotally, and I talk to a lot of people and try to confirm, things like surveys by tribal knowledge. I've had a number of conversations with people who've been in this career as long as myself, a little bit longer in some cases, where they are looking for an exit strategy. It's like, when does the hamster wheel end? Right? Is it next week with another version of ransomware? Is it our companies who aren't taking care of their individuals, who are making them work at 3 a.m. every day? Now that we're in this blended home work life, right? Like, a lot of people in the industry just have a problem shutting work off and actually setting boundaries, right? Which is something I think individually we all need to coach ourselves on and work through. But I think for the organizations and the leaders, they're looking for better strategies to avoid burnout, right? And if you think about some of the major programs out there, you think about some of our partners in incident response or managed detection and response partners that we have that are out there, they're running 24/7 inside of multiple environments, right? And you can't hire fast enough to give some relief to the good people that are doing the work. And so, look, I think as an industry, we really need to rethink what we're doing. I think automation has to step forward from someone's strategic perspective to help give your people some time to rationalize some of this new technology coming in, to really help them take a break. Because when you're not getting weekends off and when the attackers are hitting you at 5:30 on every Friday, it's just like, it gets old, right? And so I think we're mature enough as an industry where we have to start looking at the people. I have a tendency to favor what I see out of first responders. And I know in all cases, we don't equal saving human lives from a first response perspective, but I think the continual stress that we put ourselves under does lend itself to some of their strategies. And one of which, briefly, that I'll talk about is like, take a break. Like, if you have an incident, if you have a major breach, don't just throw your team back in a room executing projects the next day. Like, have some lessons learned. Take a little bit of time to understand the human impact, because most teams are going to feel like they suck. Most teams are going to feel like they let the company down, and that that has a detriment to the individuals. So just make sure you're checking in with your people, you're taking care of them, and call some safety stand downs is what we used to call them in the military. But take a couple of days where it's like, we're not doing operations other than urgent things, and we got to take a little bit of time to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, I think also the pandemic certainly hasn't helped with I think there's a general feeling of burnout. We haven't been able to get out of our homes or get out of doing the kind of constant churn. That then added on with everything that you spoke about. In that sense, it's I think that it is a big contributing factor, and I couldn't agree more as well that stepping out, whether it's taking a couple of days, whether it's just taking the dog for a walk or whatever it might be, in that sense, is really so important mentally to obviously ensure that we can survive ultimately from that point of view. TK, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this as well. I know you've been in the industry for a long time, but from that point of view, we're continually having this narrative around extreme, the extreme stress ultimately, but also how we're not continuing to grow as an industry from an expertise perspective. There's probably people going out as much as people coming in. Where do you see the kind of turn of the tide, that inflection point moving forward?
It has to do with corporate culture. I mean, many folks are not only stressed because the adversaries keep banging on the door, but they're stressed because they've been marginalized within IT organizations, where the IT organization is continually building and expanding the attack surface for the defender. And they don't feel like they have a true voice when it comes to the governance structure of the organization to say, no, we shouldn't build that app and connect it to that in such a way, or no, we shouldn't actually use that managed service provider because it's cheaper when there's one over here that does a better job of securing our infrastructure and cares more about the long-term sustainability of our brand. And so I think part of the solution is folks to embrace an empowerment strategy of their own within the organization. For CISOs right now who report to CIOs, make sure that your CEO and your board are seeing the results of the most recent penetration tests, and don't just run pen tests from outside in, but from inside out. Make sure that the non-theoretical threats that are identified through cyber threat hunting are also translated, right, to the board and to the CEO, even if you have to go around the CIO. And then most importantly, make sure they understand that worst case scenario is no longer the thievery, the burglary of the crown jewels or the intellectual property or the money of the organization. Worst case scenario is that your digital transformation is hijacked to attack your customers. And then you're dealing with regulatory penalties, you're dealing with shareholder lawsuits, you're dealing with class action lawsuits, and the brand is forever tarnished. So position it as brand protection and create a strategy for yourself to empower yourself internally.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point around brand protection. It really creates this emphasis around security being a board level problem, and ultimately you're absolutely right. I really like the way you introduce that in the sense of having a voice that's really heard within the organization. I think that's truly so important from that point of view. Switching gears slightly, but I'm glad that we touched on that topic, and I think it was a really important part that we could continue to talk about and continue to drive awareness around. But TK, switching gears a little bit, can you explain the concepts of the Kronos attack and the business communication compromise for our viewers? So how we're seeing these techniques come to life in the wild?
Yeah, many of our partners, our partners and MSSPs have noticed this in the wild. More adversaries are willing to manipulate the value of time, specific to Active Directory, specific to logs, to obfuscate their activities. And then lateral movement is obviously moving away from merely just PowerShell towards WMI, towards .NET, towards what Rick has coined a business communications compromise, where they're actually misusing Teams and Slack and other communication systems because of the implicit trust that we place in those mechanisms. I'm very concerned about the Kronos attack, the attacks on time, because of the long-term implications, whether it's for the financial sector, because of the importance of the dependency of time for the value of capital, or whether it's the future as everyone's rushing to create their own version of artificial intelligence. The dependency of the effectiveness and the sustainability of that AI is very much a function of it being able to trust time. And so when you think about the long-term implications, and as you see nation states rushing towards singularity, and there's an arms race going on between the major nation states to who can achieve singularity first, I think we need to do a better job of assessing ways in which we can protect time.
Rick, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think time attacks were a real thing for a while. Right. I mean, you can rewind the tape back to, the late 90s. Right. And you'd see all kinds of stuff happening for NTP, again, largely with the intent of taking down infrastructure or making services unavailable. Well, that's changed. Much like attackers have become more sophisticated in a lot of areas, it's more nuanced now. Right. But if I can fundamentally muck with time, well, what isn't dependent on that? I mean, is it my authentication systems? Is it, my file-based storage system so that I can audit who touched the file when? The whole thing becomes in question, right? And so I think sometimes we think problems are handled. Sometimes we think we've made pretty good progress, and we don't revisit them for a while. I think in this particular case, it's time to start looking at how we're securing that traffic, how we're securing who our systems trust from a time perspective, and then really start to think about time resiliency inside of an environment. So lots of people talk about, resiliency of systems. Well, if all of my systems rely on a thing, I have to make that fundamental thing like bulletproof, and we haven't. And so my concern is there's a whole lot of risk and a whole lot of threats that are coming that are going to hit that and take advantage of it. And so I think, looking at your own program, do a time assessment. And I know that it sounds weird even when I say it, to say like, go assess time inside your environment, but for real, go assess time inside your environment. And apply
the take-home message today.
Yeah, apply the same logic you would for any security assessment. What are the risks? How many systems would be impacted? What can an attacker do? And then what are the countermeasures that you can put in place for that?
In the same vein, I would add to that, since you're going to rely on your backups to trust time, how are you protecting your backups? What is actually allowed to communicate with your backups? At what point can you insulate or harden a backup in an immutable fashion, but also implicitly trust anyone who has access to that backup? I think more and more as you see the ransomware groups targeting backups first and coming through the backups, so there's no recourse for the victim. we need to do a better job of protecting our backups.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's, you know, who has access to the backups of the backup in that sense. And then you're absolutely right as well, is which kind of, you know, who are the members of staff as well that have got access to them, and what are we doing to protect them in that place as well. Rick, it's, you know, looking into the report further and other striking areas that I found, it's really hard to, of course, have a conversation with you both today and a conversation around security without acknowledging the rise in ransomware. So can we talk about affiliate programs, partnerships between ransomware groups that are fueling the rise, as we certainly found in the report?
Yeah, look, the startup cost to become a major ransomware player is low. It's super low, right? In fact, you could just offer up your services as an affiliate to help someone else distribute their nefarious needs, or participate in the creation of that community. And it's become a regular dark web industry, right? So there's folks that are leaving schools that can get some training in code writing, and that's the path that they're going to take. Look, I will say though, because it's not all bad news, there's been some really cool things that have occurred over the last 18 months. Right. I mean, some of the major networks have at least been taken down temporarily. You now see public-private partnerships that are just taking down infrastructure, really looking to get the American infrastructure back that's been owned. And so I do want to credit some positives. CIS has been doing some really amazing things. I really like what CIS is doing, trying to get underserved communities into cyber, right? They just put out a whole grant around it. This is amazing. Like I'm a huge fan of this. Hopefully someone in San Diego steps up to the plate and I can help contribute. But yeah, so look, I think ransomware is clearly morphing. What we've seen is, you know, it's this secondary and tertiary extortion that occurs, right? So yeah, ransomware is like the big one that's going to hit you in the face. It's going to tell you got 1,000 systems at a ransom, pay now. But is that the thing I should worry about, especially as you've seen all of the defensive vendors create, you know, we have better stuff for ransomware, right? So now you say, well, look at what happened with T-Mobile. That is just putting your data for rent or for sale on the dark web, and a massive data set. So then you go like, well, wait, extortion is really still extortion. Generally speaking, the foothold is probably some piece of ransomware, or it's a piece of ransomware that didn't execute, but they were able to get some sort of C2 channel on it, right? All of those things. So look, I think the actual like commodity ransomware is going to start to decrease at some point, but you'll see an increase because the attackers have learned the techniques. They know how to credential harvest now. They know how to do it automated. They know how to laterally move. Well, that's all I really need to do inside of an environment to get to your data. Now, as long as I can exfil it, I can put it up for sale. And, you know, the market seems to be dictating the prices as well. I mean, I thought it's a relatively cheap number that the T-Mobile, you know, data is being put up for, but actually like somebody did a really good analysis of like, that's about right. 280,000 is about right for that data set, because the corporation could buy it back very easily. I'm sure they have, you know, the budget to do that, or some nefarious group. And so they've even realized to stop overpricing themselves out from getting these ransom payments. But yeah, expect more of that. And I think less of, you know, this commodity malware that we've seen, whether it's Ryuk or TrickBot or Maze, for both of the reasons that I outlined.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about affordable, what popped into my head was affordable ransomware in that sense, or affordable process to buy back your ransomware.
Well, if you have something, you got to figure out the market pricing for it, right? And I'm going to go with, they've figured out the market pricing for this, and are achieving the right ROI for what they're doing.
But it makes it an easy conversation as well, doesn't it, from that point of view? Hey, we can afford to buy this back. This is the easiest process. We don't want to go there, but that's the facts that we're dealing with in that sense. TK, on the narrative of that as well, do you see that domestic terrorist groups in the US who are, cyber capable in that sense?
They're not there yet. Of the groups that I would be most concerned would be the Oath Keepers, because of their training in the military and training as law enforcement. Typically, they have all been trained by the military and or law enforcement previously. That being said, I'm very concerned about the capacity for them to use the services of an access broker to target a specific government agency or critical infrastructure, and then hire ransomware as a service actor to drop ransomware or to leverage something like chaos into that environment to cripple that infrastructure or government agency at the same time that they're conducting a massive protest in DC or somewhere else, like the one that's coming up on September 18th. Pay attention to that day on your calendar, my friends. There's going to be a big rally, very much QAnon-based rally in DC on the National Mall. And so whereas they're primarily using cyberspace for propaganda purposes and for recruitment, because of this service offering that we've just described, I do have concerns specific to groups like Oath Keepers who have military training.
Rick, how about yourself? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think as politics continues to be heated, you'll see a rise in hacktivism. You know, there's people on both sides in the community, and I hope and encourage everyone to stay on the ethical side, to stay on the good side, especially if you have a military or, you know, you're a veteran. I know it's a tough time for all of the vets out there, but, you know, I don't think that's the thing to do to civilize cyberspace, right? I just don't. I think we need to lean into working to public and partnerships right now, especially with things like threat intelligence. Look, we've got a whole bunch of work to do to figure out how we're going to do this in real time at scale, and it's needed, right? I mean, CISA said it, DHS said it, we say it. Like there's so many on our side, you know, and defensive communities that where I think that's where we need to put our time into, right? So this idea of, you know, hacking different political groups and parties, you know, great. That let's keep that outside. That's a big enough problem. Let's not institute that internally. And but I do think TK's right. I do think there's some people that are trained. I do think they're probably coming up with some sort of scheme that's out there. And hopefully we've got enough telemetry for law enforcement to go and find those people as fast as possible.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's important to note as well that, you know, we touched on it earlier that, you know, security operations could do with a little bit more talent. So use the talent in the right way, I think is my message there. Go and do good stuff. And I think the sense of achievement that comes with that as well, knowing that you are doing good stuff and defending, you know, your organization from a world of cyber attacks is, you know, something I think is encouraging for everyone. So, I wouldn't let politics get in the way necessarily in that point. It's a good point there. But really, you know, how can you harbor those skills in the right manner from that point? TK, I want to touch into cloudjacking as well. As cloudjacking is really just in the beginning. You mentioned this in the report, that your imminent concern is that cloudjacking becomes the future of island hopping. How likely do you think that is to happen? And do you want to talk a little bit further into that as well?
I do think it's very likely. My biggest concern is actually that cloudjacking occurs and then it leverages a rain of destructive attacks or ransomware attacks against a constituency across an industry. People have too much faith in the security of public clouds. Not all clouds are equal. Regardless of whether you're migrating to a public cloud environment, you're still responsible for robust security on your endpoints, for your applications, and even workload security itself. So I firmly believe that a lot of people just don't comprehend that. The public cloud is a really nice condo building in a really tough neighborhood. And you're still responsible for protecting your apartment, your condo unit. So don't give away the keys to the castle just because it's greater efficiency. But I do think it's coming. I think it's coming. And, you know, we're fighting a good fight every day. And as an industry and as vendors, even the latest collaborative called the JCDC by CISA to go after ransomware and use the major tech companies as a force for good in civilizing cyberspace is a great step in that direction.
Rick, have you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the hardest challenges today, right, is you know, CIOs, and of course, are going to chase cheap compute. That's just what they're going to do. That's their business model. Great. We haven't quite adapted to that, right? Meaning our controls are all over the place when it comes to clouds. You know, not every cloud vendor is the same. Some are doing a better job in certain areas. Some are doing a worse job in certain areas, right? And then, hey, it's incumbent on the team and the leader of that team to make sure that they have uniform controls across all of those varying clouds. And that is not an easy proposition today. I actually think to achieve where we need to go, you need some sort of and I'm just going to call it a security backplane for now. Please forgive me. Some people will probably beat me up for saying that, right? But essentially, I need a way to facilitate my controls regardless of the cloud that they go into. Like that doesn't need to change. I can't have a specific audit process for one cloud and then a separate attestation for another one because things can't be automated and taking screenshots. Like all of that is a giant waste of time. And the future is not going to wait around for us to do that. So I need a way to, again, ensure that I'm able to identify the risk. I'm able to prevent some of that. I'm able to detect it. And then I can damn sure respond to any of those clouds. And I can guarantee you today, a bunch of us in the audience have not even reviewed the contracts we have in place for these cloud providers. We don't actually know or have mapped what happens in the event that there's an incident inside of this environment. Who do I call? How do I get data out? Can I get data out? Oh, because contractually it says I can't get data out and it's a black box. And so I'm relying on, someone on the other end of an email to tell me what's going on. And so I think when we think about hybrid clouds and the future, which is probably going to be a hybrid cloud for most organizations, we need a layer that we can just ensure that our controls exist. And so, I'm happy to say that's one of the things that we're working on, right? So that we can ensure we have uniform controls across those various environments. But it's a major problem today. And you see some companies taking it from a visibility perspective, right? And trying to get better cloud logs so that you can understand normal and look at what happens when your authentication runs off the rails and all of that stuff. But I actually think it's a bit bigger than any of those point solutions. And it's something that as we think about the future of compute, right? And we're in the future now, we're just dragging around our legacy architectures. We have to think of opportunities inside of our programs to identify either greenfield builds or migrations that allow us to do that and create that uniformity. Because through the uniformity, you'll get simplicity and you'll get cheaper cost. That's just a byproduct. You'll need a smaller team. But today, we need a lot of people because we have all of these controls that are individual for the environments that we're in.
Yeah, I think, ultimately we all know this, and what I'm about to say is fairly obvious in that sense, but it's good to re-emphasize, ultimately that, we know that the demand for working from anywhere, working from home, the requirements of the public cloud just move so quickly that, I'm not saying the security wasn't able to keep up necessarily because we proved we can, to a certain extent, secure those environments, but we certainly know that we are reliant still on legacy environments to support these modern work, ways of work. And I think that's also drives into the emphasis, TK, that you were speaking about earlier, is making sure that we do get that foot at the table. We do make sure that, hey, IT isn't just driving this strategy, right? The IT and security is driving this strategy forward. We make sure that every time we're strategizing how to ensure that people can work from anywhere or work from particular locations, wherever that may be, we're ensuring that that's a secure environment. We're making sure that security is top of mind of that conversation. It's not just an afterthought.
And if you have a mature, team, you have enough team members, right? Because there's a shortage of us out there. You have a mature SOC. I highly recommend going to only a hybrid cloud environment. But if you have no team, really, it's just you and maybe somebody else, and you're struggling just to put out forest fires every day, then you will be better off in a public cloud environment with security. But you still need to really focus on endpoint security and application security going forward.
Absolutely. Hey, James, can I address one of the questions real quick? Because I think this is
of course.
Yeah. So John McReynolds, thanks for the question. Don't forget security of APIs. I am concerned about the next internet snowden where someone exploits an API. Yes, I agree with you. I actually know someone who's working on some stuff, not with us. They're with a partner company of ours. And there's a few companies that are actually working on that. I would also say, I think it's Elizabeth Miller, right? Is a huge hacker. She's big on kind of revealing the insecurity of APIs. But yes, so what lots of organizations have chosen to do is kludge together security solutions via APIs, and they are providing value. So I want to start by saying they do provide a huge amount of value. If you look at automation first strategies, you're going to have to go APIs. You're going to need somebody with Python, PowerShell, all of those things. That being said, in a lot of cases, it's woefully inadequate the way that we're doing it. And I do think that we're going to have to revamp what we're doing for APIs because it's just hasn't caught up. And you're right. It's the underpinning kind of kludging all this stuff together that we're taking advantage of. And it's going to come back to bite us at some point. But TK, any thoughts on securing APIs?
Yeah, I find this to be incredibly problematic in the financial sector, as every financial company out there is attempting to become a fintech vendor, and they're relying on these small little fintech companies to build out APIs for the future of their organization and capabilities. And yet there's not enough scrutiny on the security of the API. I do think the sector personally that's most at risk from this type of threat, which is imminent, is the financial sector.
And great question there, John, as well. Just touch on that, I think, or great observation, should I say, in that sense. It's certainly certainly good to talk about that. TK, I've got a couple of things as we look to wrap up today. And first and foremost, just wanting to make sure I gave you the opportunity to give your thoughts on Black Matter. I know that you wanted to talk about that today, so over to you.
Yeah, I mean, Black Matter is a legit cybercrime cartel. Composed of two groups, both of which we thought that we had taken offline. We both know who they are. We need to pay attention to the fact that DarkSide and Revil have combined, and that they're also being assisted by intelligence services. It's blatant, it's obvious, and when you knock down these groups online, they're not going to not pop back up. But most importantly, we have to deal with the protection racket that exists in that country, a robust protection racket where these people are seen as national assets that help them offset economic sanctions, and who have been leveraging acts of cyber terror against US organizations for the past 2 years.
So shifting gears and onto the last point, and I'm going to bring up one of the comments that our latest howler, Karen, did mention on the chat as well. So Karen said, and I'm really looking forward, by the way, to all of the audience for Karen to join me in a few months on this very channel. I am super excited for that. But Karen mentioned about companies can do so much with a strong governance process that has a zero trust mindset to elevate and alienate the security team. Now, with that and focusing on zero trust, TK, if you were to envision a zero trust architecture in a physical world, what would that look like?
I think it would look like the first Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, the ADX facility that was meant to house the worst of the worst. Because they realized that the most significant criminal minds and terrorists in the world would have a cult of personality behind the prison walls, would be able to leverage conspiracies against the outside world from within those prisons, which is why they developed the original Supermax. And I think the construct of the Supermax, how it's been developed, how it forces the prisoner to be resource constrained, to be situationally unaware, to limit their communications and their knowledge of the facility, and to be very difficult for them to even understand where the facility is located, allows for an environment where I think zero trust can manifest. Again, zero trust is really the assumption, from my perspective, that they're going to get in. They're going to get in, and at the point they get in, how are you going to manage and defend from inside out? And I think that's really where we have to realize that zero trust is a journey, and we need to understand, really, what is it truly manifesting, and where does beyond zero trust go? How do we extend it to our larger information supply chain?
Rick, how about yourself?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of people looking to go zero trust, and they're doing that on a bad foundation. So I think I opened this up with, if I could snap my fingers, I'd patch everything and get that foundation shored up. Yeah, so Karen and I spent a bit of time talking about this too, but it's really this idea of ground up cyber vigilance enabled by cyber hygiene, right? And so yes, to do zero trust, I need application, I need all of those things, right? But fundamentally, if I don't have my house in order, to TK's point, that prison was designed with those outcomes in mind. Our IT systems were not. Our IT systems were designed with the outcome in mind that you had customers and or users or employees that needed to access something, and it was faster to do it online. It was easier, it was cheaper, right? Well, I think we need to fundamentally rethink that a bit. And that, no, I don't mean like net tear down of all of our infrastructure and rebuilds, but we do refreshes all the time. We have new environments going and everybody's got cloud projects, right? So I think it gives us an opportunity to set that good baseline that then enables zero trust to actually be effective, because there are people in zero trust models that's not effective, and they're not disrupting any adversary inside their environments. And generally, if you trace it all the way back, they're taking advantage of the same the same misses as everybody else. User clicks on a thing, said Flash was vulnerable on the endpoint, Flash starts to do something wonky, and then, right? Well, if I don't have that good foundation and I haven't really been thoughtful about the outcomes I want to drive from a technology perspective, well, security's out of the room, they're out of the deal, and it's not considered. And then we try to retrofit. And then we try to retrofit after e-commerce became a thing. And then we tried to retrofit again. And so I do think we got to fundamentally think about those outcomes and include them. And the physical example I use is the automotive industry. There's who's designing maybe some of the supercars, right? You can correct me on that, James, but like who's creating a car without safety in mind? Like, I don't know of one manufacturer that doesn't have seatbelts, that doesn't have, an extreme amount of electronic code that now looks at other vehicles on the road to try to do collision avoidance. It's got turn signals, it's got headlights, it's got windshield wipers. All of those things were built into this vehicle with those use cases of safety in mind. Well, great. Let's rethink how we do technology deployments and think a little more like that.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. And you think about, like, I can use something close to my heart, and you know where I'm going to go with this, right? But you look into like Formula One, for example. Like, Formula One is built upon, if we want to use that narrative, built upon the safety of the driver. Like, it doesn't matter how fast we can go if the driver's not safe, the sport can't continue. And I think the example there is, you look at situations that happened last year, and it's proven that the continued focus on safety can actually allow for a sport which is ultimately more enjoyable, but also faster as well when those two things are together. We're not saying, and I think the emphasis here is we're not saying to slow things down to focus on security. We're actually saying these can actually go side by side when done properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we're launching rockets and they're doing it fairly safely. Like if they can drive the outcome of we want to return people from Mars, right? Like, I think we can spend a little bit of time engineering security by design when we're delivering IT solutions. It's just an engineering problem that has to be solved, right? And I think we have all the smart people working on it, so we should be able to accomplish that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. TK, I want to make sure I give you the opportunity just before we wrap up, if there's anything else you want to add from the IR report, anything that you'd like to say while we're on the channel.
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing. In the void, in the disillusionment of cybersecurity professionals who are becoming more disgruntled, you also have a large percentage of them that want to take the gloves off, that want to leverage active defense. Again, that's a spectrum of activity that begins with deception and it goes all the way through hacking back. I think it's high time that we revisit, technologies like, projected deception or micro sharding, or do we even have the right to poison our own data, destroy our own data when it leaves our environment? I think much more discussion needs to be had with lawmakers and regulators vis-a-vis, we're not hacking back. But the real question is, can we track our data when it leaves our environment? Can it beacon home, tell us where it went? And can we destroy that same data when it doesn't exist within our environment anymore? Do we have the right to do that? And so, again, not advocating hacking back, but I do think there's a pivot going on here where you've got disgruntled cybersecurity professionals saying, you know what? Taking the gloves off. Had it with this, not going to keep on getting punched in the face. So it's an interesting conversation.
It is. Rick, how about yourself?
Yeah, look, I think it's an interesting topic, right? This idea of self-defense versus, going after the people who are mugging me in my neighborhood, right? Like vigilantism is cyber vigilantism is more the way I'd put that, right? Because it's not exactly a legal activity. But look, yeah, I made a LinkedIn post and someone was like, why did you make this post? Like, and I go, this is a real conversation. Like, I hear this conversation a lot, right? And I do have a tendency to believe that it's a wasted conversation. And I don't mean that like theoretically we should have these discussions. I mean, it's wasted because the time should be put back into TK's point. There are a number of things inside an environment that folks aren't doing. You can go look at Shield from MITRE. Thank you for putting this out. Essentially, what the community is attempting to do is give a prescription, techniques, tactics, and procedures that defenders can use to actively defend themselves inside of an environment, which it needs work. right? I'll be the first one to say that I could probably spend some time in there doing some write-ups as well. But I really like the spirit of that, right? Like taking an attack. Hey, it's been out for 4 or 5 years now. Good. We've got a good understanding of how the attackers, but what are the best defenders on earth doing? And can we make that into a best practice? Can we prescribe that into technology? Can we break that technology down into policy sets that need to be put in place? Yes, I think we can. Yes, I think it's time. And so I'm encouraged that, like, for one of the first time I've seen, defenders are truly being open and honest and going like, hey, here's what works for us. Anybody have any tweaks? Let's call that better practice today. And then let's iterate and improve upon it. And until I think we get real iterative on that, and we all kind of rally around something like that, then I think teams will understand what it means to do deception at scale inside of an environment, to do memory level deception, file level deception. And to TK's point, like I think this should be a no-brainer that I should be able to, hard encrypt my data if it leaves certain boundaries. Well, we're probably going to need some technology to help with that. Maybe it's a DLP manufacturer out there. I don't know. But I think this idea of data tagging and understanding where it goes and ultimately being able to have a kill pill for that, that's a cool idea. And we should be running towards that as an industry for sure.
Well, there you have it, folks. Everyone joining in. I hope that's been useful, of course, to everyone. I think we touched on so many different subjects there within the IR report, and we certainly touched on some subjects that I think ultimately will possibly touch people's nerves. But that's what we're here as well. We want to make sure that people really feel it from that point of view. Guys, should we jump into the Q&A? I think there's a question in there. So whoever wants to take this, I'm certainly not picky. So whoever wants to take this, what is your opinion on mitigating risk by migrating from a physical infrastructure to a cloud-based infrastructure?
It depends. What is your team good at today? Right? Like, because there are some leapfrogs that if you're with the right cloud vendor and they're doing their jobs, like you can in fact leapfrog capabilities that your team has today. Maybe they have managed detection and response, whatever those things are, right? Maybe they're doing managed patch cycles that you don't have to worry about. And so you go, criticals are in 30 days, great, awesome. So again, it depends on what your team's good at today. And then it depends on what the vendors provide you. And that's a little bit of a punt answer, but honestly, it's a case-by-case basis. And you have to sit down and I think, again, think about the capabilities on your team, do a maturity assessment of each one of those capabilities, and then weigh that against any partner coming in, and be ready to be humble and admit when your team's not good at something, and admit when someone's better, and embrace that, right? They are part of your team. And so I think a lot of times we get a little egotistical, and I'll put myself on the hook for that. And I'd be like, my team's awesome, we can do it all. No, we can't. And no, we shouldn't have. There's some really good people out there doing some really good stuff. And so again, I think if you have a level of self-understanding of your program and you're real good about doing an honest, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, you're going to find that a whole lot of times there's partners out there that you may have to accept some risks, right? Nothing comes risk-free. You might have to accept some of those, but the trade-offs may in fact be worth it, and are actually able to move your program ahead where it might have taken you 3 or 4 years on-prem to do that.
TK, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that's spot on. I would just say that, remember the story of the 3 little pigs. This should not be a decision based on cost. It should not be solely based on cost. Not all public clouds are equal. And again, as a purist, as a security purist, I'm leaning towards hybrid cloud environments first.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the hybrid cloud is certainly the not necessarily the safe spot. I don't want to necessarily use that word, but certainly the mature approach to that in that sense. Guys, it's always been an honor. I say this every time, but it's an absolute honor to have you both on the session today. We've ran for 50 minutes, so I have to close it out at some point. But thank you, as always, for sharing your insights, your knowledge, the IR report, and the work. I want to, say as a member of the Howlers, the VMware, and of course on behalf of all of our customers and partners, thank you for putting the IR report together as well. It's extremely useful, and I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of people there. And of course, to our listeners as well, thank you for attending Ask the Howlers, whether you're attending live, whether you're going to be watching this on Friday evening with a beer. I don't mind how you watch it, but make sure you watch it. And of course, thank you for joining the Ask the Howlers session, that roundtable for security leaders. Remember to add also your topic requests as well for future episodes. In the comments below, we do pick up the comments after the sessions run. But two things before I go. Of course, we have been posting on the comments the Global Incident Response Threat Report that I just spoke about. Make sure you download your copy. It is free. Typical narrative. I tell you when things are free. That one is also free as well. So read it. Whether you want to read it while you're watching this on a Friday with a beer, that sounds great to me. And of course, secondly to that as well, join all of us, the three of us, and the rest of the VMware team at VMworld 2021. It's fast around the corner. 5th to the 7th of October, you can register. The link will go in the comments as I speak. So register now for VMworld, not to be missed. There's so much cool content. There's a massive emphasis on security. So please join those sessions. But with that, and wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, but of course from me, good evening and good night. Take care, everyone.